talk about the topic and set up the topic that you're going to hear from the panelists today. These are all volunteers that are serving on the city's Alternative Revenue Task Force. And the reason this group has been drawn together is the city council is working under a construct that more money needs to be identified to support Salem services, basic services of the city. Discussion has occurred really developed over the last 2 years within the budget committee, as the City of Salem Budget Committee, which is also a volunteer group, gathers together each year and charts the path of city priorities, and then takes a recommendation as a body, of which, by the way, all Salem city councilors sit on that budget committee, and then provide a recommendation back to the Salem City Council on voting on their annual budget moving forward. We know that you have heard a lot about the budget. Certainly our mayoral candidates have talked a lot about the budget. We had an attempted payroll tax that was soundly turned down by the voters. And what has resulted is the formation of an alternative revenue task force, which's role is to come together and have a final product that would be brought back to presentation to the Salem City Council for their consideration and potentially people, depending on what is identified in this task force. These 6 individuals have stepped forward and raised their hands while many others would not. They submitted their name to serve on this budget task force. The Salem Chamber was asked to submit an individual to serve, and that individual we selected is Raquel Green. I think we can all agree Raquel brings an incredible balance and perspective to any table that she is sitting at. I'd like to introduce our panel and just give you a little bit of color about who they each are. And then we're going to turn it over and allow each of the panelists to share maybe about 3 to 5 minutes, depending about how passionate you are. A little bit, what we're looking for is your experience thus far. And then we'll go into certain questions like, process been transparent? Are there any kinks you've seen in the process? Are there things you'd like to see different? And then really what we'd like to boil down to is kind of where we are now at this stage in the process and key ideas that are being considered from the financial front as a group that may be brought forward for city council consideration. To my immediate left is dear friend Russ Beaton. Russ and I have known each other many years. Russ has been involved with Salem City Club. He is a retired professor of economics at Willamette University, and he is representing the City Club group on the Alternative Revenue Task Force. Next up is our past president, TJ Sullivan. TJ was selected by the City Council for his ward to serve on the task force, and we'll hear from TJ in a moment. David Reinhold is next. David is the owner of Reinhold Insurance Services, and he is representing the Latino network within the Salem and Kaiser larger communities there. Next is Raquel Green, who I mentioned, and Raquel has her consulting company. Scott Cantawine is next to Raquel. Scott is from the Northeast Salem area, representing the former Cascade Warehouse, and I'd like to, his name tent is a little incorrect. He hasn't updated quite yet his LinkedIn, and I'd like to clarify Scott is the manager of CWC Investment Company, and we appreciate Scott serving on this task force and bringing his perspective to the table. And finally, Bill Riecke with Barkwoods. Bill is an incoming board member on the Salem Area Chamber of Commerce starting on July 1st, and Bill has been very active within the revenue discussion and represents, again, a company that is outside in Northeast Salem. With that, I would like to allow Russ, if you would start us off. Is that appropriate? I see a giggle. I can flip a coin and go a different way if you prefer. But Russ, you're certainly ready to do this. Russ, if you would start us off with a little of your color of the process thus far and some of your thoughts you have going into this revenue task force.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting me. And I was hoping you'd start at the other end.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I thank you because I didn't know why I was on it. All I knew was I was appointed and I thought it might be for Ward 1 where I live and where TJ placed a very dystopian view of Ward 1 in our last meeting. Okay, I'm going to get right to the bottom line so you can stone me earlier if you want, because I introduced last meeting, as some of you know, an income tax for Salem proposal. Now, the reason I did that, I want to be very clear, is that the charge that we have and the data we've been given by the consultants and by the staff as to the depth of the problem that the city is in suggests to me, as an economist who's taught urban economics all my career, that structural tax reform is needed. By structural reform, I would say we tax certain things we haven't taxed before, and we stop taxing some others that we are taxing. And the only item on our agenda that on our 41-point list of options that was given us, which has become kind of an internal laughing stock, I think, to us, right, TJ? It's the only thing in there that would actually fund tax reform. So I felt it was necessary to inject that into the debate. I want to tell you a little story about last meeting because it has raised some concerns in my mind about the whole process. I had a couple or three slides on a thumb drive that I wanted to show as I introduced the income tax idea. I emailed Jesse, who one of the consultants who usually convenes the meetings. I emailed her in the morning of the day of the meeting saying, I hope there'll be somebody there to help me get the thing on it, not without my help. I'm no good at all on the computer of putting things up on the screen. And I didn't get an answer. I walked into the chamber. I've got there early because I knew I had to negotiate getting this thing up on the screen. And the first thing I walked into the meeting was our finance director, the city finance director, Josh. Very concerned look on his face. Did you get my email? I said, no. What did it say? When I got home later, looked at the email, it had come in less than 2 hours before the meeting. I'd been pretty busy and I hadn't looked it up. He said, we don't usually want members of the task force to make presentations. I said, oh, really? What are we there for? Cardboard cutouts. Well, listen to staff and then they make a recommendation and we say great and we're put it on our resume that we were on the task force and that's it. Well, he kind of hemmed and hawed and it kind of walked away. Well, I looked over and there was a technical guy at the computer. I walked up to him, said, I have a thumb drive. And he, sure, put it in, hooked it up, no problem. Okay. Then during the meeting, and quite honestly, the first hour wasn't spent too productively. I'll put that delicately. Telling us what we knew already in terms of all the problems. Then we finally got to the income tax idea about 8:45, 6:30, a meeting that started at 6:30 and it's 8:45. And that sort of ended the meeting. Then at the end, one of the consultants came up to me and was a little bit upset, sort of saying, whoa, you got to be careful. You're meeting outside the task force. Well, I looked at the charge and the charge was get out there in the community, learn what everybody thinks, bring it back to this meeting, okay, and get broad community input, sort of thing. Said, you realize this is an open meeting now. You got to give me all your data and be careful we don't want, this is what finally got me. We don't want the image out there in the community that a group of liberals is collaborating behind the scenes to inject something into the task force. And I said, I was irritated by then. And I said, well, you know, the real word on the street out there is that the consultants and the staff are running the agenda behind the scenes. And kind of dropped it. Then I bit my tongue and said, yeah, I'm going to say it. I said, you need the advice you just gave me worse than I do. Okay, so that's the background of all of that. I could say a lot more about the about the process. I really think that our charge is to give the city options for revenue. Quite honestly, I tend to almost resent all the detail about the different services that we've been given. You know, we don't make the decision, police versus library, fire versus parks, homelessness versus infrastructure, all that. I see that as a budget committee problem, and that we show them, here's some options. What do you want to do with it? Goes to the public at that point. So there you are, and I will be glad to answer any questions you have. I bring this book with me that I've authored. It's called The Economics of Hope. I co-authored it with my brother, who has done the spreadsheet stuff that we've modeled the income tax thing over or after. I got home and I'll say a word about that. I'm not selling books. I'm a miserable marketer. If any of you want to help me there, that's fine. But this book has three parts. The first one is the inequality crisis of this country. The second is the environmental climate change crisis. And the third part recommends a much more vibrant local economy as we go into a post-globalized era. There's a whole lot of stuff there. But I firmly believe, and I believe that the city has a serious revenue problem, okay? I don't know how much all of you agree with that, but I believe that we could begin to wean ourselves, in a sense, from the global economy with a much more vibrant local economy. And I believe that one of the big problems in this culture, in any city almost, is a pro-business, anti-business attitude. I think that's very corrosive. I would love to see a community where the likes of the Chamber of Commerce is a central community institution, and it isn't seen as a pro-business fringe group over on one side or another. Excuse me. Oh, that was a mistake. Just to establish my own credentials here. I don't consider myself primarily a liberal or a progressive. I consider myself a radical because I don't agree with the structure of the system and of where money runs everything. And I'm primarily referring to national politics. And the textbook definition of a radical is you don't agree with the structure of the system. So there you go. But I was a consultant to the Chamber of Commerce some years ago. I did an industrial land survey. It was widely accepted, and I really enjoyed it. I co-authored a study in probably 1980. Yeah, I'm very old. I look old. I'm older than I look, you know, okay. I co-authored that study in 1980, I believe, with L.B. Day, my co-author, Tom McCall's old buddy. And out of that study, we created Salem Industrial Park and started SEDCOR. So I've been involved in economic issues in Salem for a long time, and I hope to continue that. But anyway, I'm enjoying being on the Revenue Task Force. I hope I think it has to do some substantial stuff for the city. We can't just kick the can down the road with little fees here and there. And I want to say in closing, I strongly think that a city income tax should supplant any further taxes on business. And I've made that clear to Tom. We've talked about that, and I gotta close by complimenting Tom. When I asked him at one point, I think it was at the mayor's State of the City address, which I had introduced the mayor. And I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "We don't care. It needs to be equitable, needs to be fair." Remember saying that?
I don't remember the "we don't care" part, but I definitely remember the.
Maybe he said,
equity.
"I don't care." I don't. Anyway, thank you, Tom,
That's a great
for the
perspective.
time. I took longer than I probably should have.
Nope, we're gonna have a great roundtable conversation, and Russ, you do not need to substantiate who you are. You've been a great partner in this community, and this is a house of great diversity of opinion.
Yes, it is.
And I think part of the narrative, if I may interject, is you had mentioned far right and pro-business. Our members are across actually the whole
Absolutely.
political gambit, and but there is one uniting force to all of us. That small business is very, very helpful for a city's economic ecosystem, and so that unites us all and brings us to the table too.
Let me add one point on that. My writing and my career has convinced me that when many of the quote unquote anti-business attitudes that kind of spring up, I think most of which are absolutely not well taken. People object to abuses that they sense from corporate, globalized, national, multinational corporations. Then they blame small business. And then the regulation that comes along tries to get at that corporate irritant. And they can avoid most regulation, even if just by moving around the world. You cannot. And you get stuck with regulation that's meant for some other issue. And I make a point in this book, if we had a more vibrant local economy, it doesn't need the regulation that we have, because you business people live in the community. You don't want to be blamed for messing up the community, and you also live there. And if there's environmental damage or something like that, you have to experience it just like anyone else. So anyway,
Our members are.
I've already said this in print. I'm not just telling you what you want to hear today. Okay.
Thank you, Russ. Our owners and their employees certainly live here, take great pride in Salem.
That's right.
Certainly wish for it to continue to be an incredible place. Past President Sullivan.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to have Russ on the committee because I was afraid I was going to be the fly in the ointment.
I'm willing to accept the death threats. Fine.
Yeah, it turns out it's Russ. So I served 2 terms on city council, and during those 2 terms, we all saw this budget cliff. But one of the things that I came to understand was that there are historical things that are at play. And if you look historically at our budget, we've never faced the cliff that was always allegedly around the corner because of how our city collects money. And so we were instructed, we had to start with this premise that we're about to fall off the cliff, we need additional revenue. So I took it at that same, agenda. I had showed up at council last year and said, you guys are getting one-time funds from the federal government. Don't spend them on ongoing programs. They immediately created new programs. And then it's like, oh, look at golly, we're out of money. I'll be darned.
I'll be darned.
And so I appreciate what Russ has done. I don't necessarily like it. I figured it out for the Sullivan family. It's a $40,000 hit to the Sullivan family. And, I asked my wife, I said, how far would you go to save $100? And she said, I'd go pretty far to save $100. I said, would you go to Turner to save 40,000? We live half mile from Turner. And she said, I probably would. So, I think there's gonna be a lot of families looking to establish residency just outside the city limits or in second home or whatever. But I do appreciate what Russ has done, is it is creative, it is inventive. I think there's one universal thing on the committee is that these consultants are a waste of time and space. But I appreciate what Russ has done in creating an alternative for us to, you know, look at and consider, and I think it is worth looking at and considering.
TJ, those rates were a joke. All right.
Okay, okay, good.
To get your attention. I see that they did.
They got my attention, yeah.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you, TJ.
Yeah, David Reinhold. One thing I noticed was the process. One of the first things they brought to our attention was we had 3 different pathways we could go down. One pathway was trying to maintain staff levels, another pathway was trying to retain service levels, another one was trying to cover the expenses for the homeless. Or a fourth one was to do everything. And, you know, I'm thinking that should have been decided at city council, which direction they wanted to go, along with the budget committee. And once they figured out what that gap is, once they figured out what they could cut out of the budget, once they figured out city council wanted to achieve, then come to us and say, okay, this is how much money that we need to raise for revenue. That's not what happened. They got the budget committee over here trying to cut. They got us here saying, do you want to raise between 9 million and 50-some million? And so sidebar conversations, I've been hearing people like, which scares me, well, why stop at 50? Why don't we go to 80? Why don't we give them more money than they want? And I'm like, I'm involved in a lot of nonprofits. I'm like, this is not a nonprofit. This is not a fundraiser. So where, I mean, those kind of conversations. And I think those kind of conversations started taking place because how it was presented to the task force. And there wasn't these guardrails about, okay, this is exactly what you guys got to raise revenue for, and you guys go figure out how you want to come up with those ideas.
Thus far, everybody talking about process. After we get through the conclusion of Bill's process and opening comments, we are going to get into the actual considerations and some of those conversations on items they've seen. Raquel.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I will echo everything that Russ, TJ, and David have said so far. And I think what I would like to add to it from a process standpoint is I think there are about 26, 27 members of this task force, all accomplished professionals within the community and a vast array of professionals. And they have spoon fed us. And to the degree that it's a little bit insulting, it is. Our time is valuable. And
Yes.
instead of, you know, giving us our packets ahead of time so that we can review, be prepared for the meeting and go in and have a robust conversation. As Russ said, we spend the first hour reviewing our goal, our mission, and the four areas of potential raising of revenue. So I've been I have obviously been very frustrated with process. I am, to the degree that the way it's been structured, and I hate to say this, but echoing David's comments, it's kind of preconceived what it is that they want us to do. They want us to make the decision on the amount. City council doesn't. So they can point back and say it was them. It was their recommendation. You know, they were the ones who chose to fill the whole gap with all of these or not. And that really, that's not leadership. That's not taking ownership for what it is that you've been elected to do.
So, Scott.
Good morning, everybody. I can make this really short and just say ditto. But I think there's been some interesting themes that have been across everybody's comments. I think the lack of transparency has been striking. To Raquel's comment about the kind of the spoon-fed, engineered nature of Moss Adams' involvement has been very telling. You know, these meetings generally run from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. We're not having any substantive policy discussions, idea deliberation until 8 p.m. We're spending 90 minutes rehashing pre-read materials. I mean, it'd be a great college course. You just go and instead of reading what's been given to you, just have it read back to you and call it a day. I think one of the most telling things for me has been the very decisive commands from the city staff, from the consultants, that they don't want to have any conversations about expense reduction. They don't want to have any conversations about program management. It's all just money, 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 raise the money. And I think from a management practice perspective, that's not to be hyperbolic, but it's terrifying. We have a proposal in front of us, not discussing the merits, but Russ's proposal of $110 million rough order magnitude dollars coming into the city. The demonstrated management practice of the city is that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to give we have the analogy of spending like a drunken sailor. We're just giving them a bigger boat with more money. From a management perspective, that's troubling. Now we've got what, 3 more meetings?
Oh, yes.
Hopefully we get to the deliberation stage and kind of refine some of these ideas. The purpose of me being here today is not to rail on the city, not to rail on Moss Adams. But one topic that's come up over and over again is, we'll make information requests to the consultants, to the city staff to try and refine some of these ideas, try and inform some of these ideas. Bill and I have had sidebar conversations about this, and I don't think we've seen a single piece of information delivered back to the committee. To the extent that you don't want to say it's politically engineered to blame shift, but it certainly seems that way.
Thank you for the process, Bill.
So experience thus far, one thing I want to note is the very first meeting was held at the library, and there was stacks and stacks of informational paperwork for us to pick up. One of the stacks of paper we were supposed to pick up was a W-4, so that you could get paid to be there. And I paid real close attention to that, and I'm sure someone picked up a W-4, but the bulk of people did not. And I was actually very proud to sit on the committee after noticing that everyone is there with a good heart for the right reasons to make Salem better. So to Raquel's point earlier, that the people on the task force are there for the right reasons, and they really are trying to help the city. So I thought that was really good. In terms of transparency, I would echo what everyone else has spoken about here. Moss Adams, who was hired, I think, for the tune of $200,000 by the city, gave us 41 ideas to generate revenue, which to me came across as just regurgitation ideas of the city staff and maybe city council. I'm not sure where that came from. I do agree with Russ that I think his presentation ruffled some feathers. I unfortunately had a heated exchange after the meeting with a city staffer because I think that they have this idea and agenda that they want to push, and once an outside thought comes in, it was very troubling to them. I tried to watch the faces on some key people in that room, and the reaction and the expression on faces was telling to me, at least, that they weren't happy with an outside the box idea, which I thought was great. Scott said about 8:30 we actually really get to the meat and potatoes of these meetings. I disagree. I think it's about 8:45, 8:50. We're actually in it. I'm not trying to be facetious there. I think that's true. The last 2 meetings, we've actually got something done in the last 10 minutes. So I think we've had 3 or 4 meetings, and not a whole heck of a lot has been accomplished during that time. I do think they're trying to rush the process a little bit. I spoke about this at the last meeting, and I think I referenced the fact that nobody here that I'm aware of picked up a W-4 to get paid for this. We're willing to go a little bit farther into the summer months and get this done. Do any of us, have other things to do? I'm sure that we do. I don't think the city staff gets paid for those evening hours. They'd like to be doing other things, spending time with their family as well. But I think we've got a big problem here, and I don't see there's a reason to rush the process if it's not a fully baked deal. And we can go into summer months, into the fall, if that's what it takes to get it done. One of the other themes here, in terms of collaboration, with the budget committee and we can't suggest making cuts and things like that. I asked the very first meeting if we could, the task force could meet and work together with the budget committee. And the city attorney said no. I'm not really sure what the legalities of that would be, but said no. It would be nice to be on the same page with them and maybe that would help us with our generating revenue if we knew what was being cut already, things like that. So, to Scott's point at the last meeting, I brought forward a motion that we would get minute meetings and documents for the next meeting before the day of the meeting, because that's what's been happening is the day of the meeting, we get the documents for the meeting. Well, we all are busy doing whatever it is that we do. And that wasn't received really well. I was told we actually don't need a motion for that. And I wanted to fire back. Well, then just do it. But they probably won't, which is very unfortunate.
I appreciate all of you setting up the construct and the base. If we could, now let's move into a little bit of the discussions of, have there been any eye-opening things that you've heard in the committee or anything that's piqued your interest? Or would we like to dive right into some of the items that are brought forward and discuss the merits of those suggestions? Very open to whoever would like to go, and I don't feel like we need to go in order from this point on.
Well, I actually liked Russ's idea, because I followed up with a question that wasn't answered by city staff. But I said, well, if we take this on board, will we eliminate, property tax? And there were some nods of agreement with that. So, if Russ is in his, I'll call it his team, come up with an idea that generates more than the proposed shortfall of revenue, and we can eliminate property taxes, I'd be okay with that. Again, it was very outside the box presentation by Russ, and I thought it was really well done. I'm not sure how well was received by the city.
Russ, for those in the audience and listening, because we do have a lot of people that watch online and then later in the when we publish, could you share a little bit about what your proposal was? And it sounds like maybe the numbers accurate, but the framework, could you explain to our group what you proposed as alternative revenue tax?
Yeah, I'd like to ask my panelists, fellow panelists, a question. How many of you were aware going into the last meeting that we had an income tax simulation model that the staff had done, or the consultants? How many of you are aware of that?
No.
Okay, I wasn't either. And there's these big documents on our desk when we sat down. And I swear, yeah, and I started reading, there's the sheet we got for each of the taxes, 41, and that monstrous document that we were given, that kind of gives a structure of how each one might apply it. Is it politically viable? How much would it raise, et cetera, et cetera. Not a lot of data in there. There's a lot of hypotheses. All right. I had prepared the income tax thing, and my brother and I had gotten the data from the state of Oregon on actual income tax filings, 104,200 income tax filings, and we modeled the exact income tax structure of Salem, and the Department of Revenue gives us all that. Well, the staff, or the consultants really, I believe, had modeled an income tax thing, and it had all kinds of funny options on it. And none of us realized that was there, apparently. I didn't, going into the meeting, because the material wasn't circulated in advance. Maybe it was, but it was buried in 50 or 60 pages that came out that day or the day before. We didn't have a lot of time to review the data. I realized then, after what I did, that I had threatened the use of their structure because they use different data and a different simulation methodology. I'll make no contention that I can't do that, for God's sake. That's what I did for my career. My brother who modeled it, used to teach Excel for the state. He was the head computer instructor for the state of Oregon. So we had the skills to do that. I realized that, as somebody else said to me on the task force afterwards, you threatened their control of the committee. You threatened their control of the process. See, and that speaks to what all of you have said on the way down. And I didn't realize until the next day, and I got home and I was reviewing the data. I thought, oh my God, they have already simulated the income tax. No wonder I threatened their world. And my goal now is to see that the committee retains control of the process. But conceptually, I guess the process is not, the committee members are not supposed to have the skills to do the things that the staff does. And if you do, the staff loses control. And I'm afraid that's where we are. Raquel?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Russ, for further on that. I had no idea about the conversation that had gone on previous and that them being unwilling, okay? But Tom, to your point, for anybody who wants to go back and listen to Russ's presentation that evening, CCTV on their YouTube channel has the task force uploaded, and Russ starts at 2 hours and 4 minutes in. You know how at the bottom you can go along and you can fast forward, and you can pick up there and you can follow along what Russ was describing to us, which as Bill said, it's for us at the time is out of the box. Apparently it's not out of the box because Moss Adams had it in their back pocket and unwilling to share it with us. But Tom, to your question about what have I found interesting? So one of the things that a few things that the city has done, you know, they had the outreach to the neighborhoods, they had town halls around this, and then DHM out of Portland also did a phone survey, right? A phone and text survey. And out of that, what I found so interesting was, and I'm going to read two statements to you. Negative impacts on the local economy are by far the most important decision criteria for residents. All other criteria are of average or below average importance. So asked, you know, what would the negative effects be? You know, they didn't want to affect the local economy, and the local economy translates to me our local businesses, right? But then the next question, the next statement is, when asked about general revenue options, a plurality preferred taxes and fees be paid by either businesses or the people who buy and use the services. So we've got a real, people are conflicted. They don't want to affect the local economy, but they want to put it on the backs of businesses. I found that fascinating, just fascinating. And at that point when, you know, so this was presented to us on the 25th, but, you know, and I think the whole committee was kind of stuck on that. Wow, that's an interesting place to be. So that was one of my takeaways.
Was one of those individuals that participated in the 3 presentations across our community, 2 in person and 1 online. And the very shocking part of the 1 online was a question asked in a poll format. And this is a public meeting. You can watch this live. And the first question was, you know, who should this be borne by everybody across the community? And by and large, a very high response said, yes, this should be shared across the community. And then they asked a question and wonder where this answer went. Would you prefer to pay this, or would you prefer the business community to pay? Why would you ask? So to me, you're asking a very faulty question that of course is going to lead, if you're on that call, it's very easy to defer to somebody else paying. So that is kind of some of the construct that they're building, is the community's response on those answers and then taking them to you as the task force.
It's irritating. Tom, everybody's favorite tax is a tax on someone else.
If we could, are there any other things that were surprising in the process thus far? I don't want to skip over. Bill, any, or David, TJ, any answer on that? Seeing none, could we start to go into some of the concepts that have gained some traction? And things that have intrigued you, or things that you're standing and hearing about that you are adamantly against? Bill, could we start with you on that end?
Well, I don't know that anything's gaining traction, to be honest with you. 3 or 4 months into the process, 3 or 4 meetings, I should say. I don't know that we've got that far yet, which is unfortunate, but you know, all of the 41 options are going to cost all of us money somehow. You know, there are, this document is robust in the cost to the people, the cost to the community, time to implement, the cost to implement, things like that. But all of this stuff, you know, some of it, I don't know how you would, or what type of revenue you will generate off of a local bike tax, right? So every time you buy a bicycle for your kid, you got to pay tax on that, or you know, a sin tax, and which would be different than a marijuana tax that's over here on the other page, and red light cameras and things like that. So of this list of 41 options, I don't know that any of them have gained any traction. The only one that is interesting to me is the sale of surplus equipment or sale of surplus property. So, you know, Tom and I actually had a discussion about this, and Tom's point was, well, but if we sell equipment now to generate revenue, we do have to buy that equipment again. It's going to be more expensive. So we actually lost money. I think that's a very good point. However, take, for example, this is one example, I think, of many that could spread throughout the city of Salem. The city of Kaiser doesn't own a street sweeper. They have that private contracted out. City of Salem owns their own street sweepers. They're a couple $100,000 a piece. So do we sell those? Maybe sell a job to an employee that runs that street sweeper right now. Set him up as a small business person, or she up as a small business person, and let them private contract and bid on that like the rest of us do. Just one idea. You know, if you go through the City of Salem shops over on 22nd Street, you will see a plethora of dump trucks and trailers with mini excavators on the back of them. I bet you there's 10 of them. Do we need 10, or are there local construction contractors here in town that can be put on a contract that within, you know, 6 hours notice as part of the contract, you need to be at our emergency, you know, plumbing issue that the city is experiencing. Put a plan in place that we're not just having an auction of equipment to generate revenue one time. Let's have a plan in place that we get rid of this equipment, but here's who's going to take this over for us. And it will, you know, 1, generate revenue, 2, save funds. You know, there's an organization here in town that has a 100-year plan, a nonprofit has a 100-year plan, but they have a bunch of surplus real property. Well, if the city of Salem is in a similar position that they've got surplus real property all over the city that they're not going to use, and we do in fact have a budget crisis, then we need to start selling property. No other business can go to their bank and say, hey, we're about ready to be bankrupted. And the bank looks at them and says, well, but you have, you know, $100 million worth of property over here. Can you go sell that? No, that's for future plans. You can't, you can't do that. But the city thinks that they can. So I think before the city puts anything on the back of its citizens, I think they need to sweep their front porch first.
No, I think it's a good segue into one of my bigger points is, you know, we talk a lot about structural tax reform. I think something that's an absent from that conversation and from our deliberation have been the concepts of structural expense reform and structural management reform. You know, some of the examples that Bill shared as far as maybe suboptimal use of equipment capacity. I just think, you know, if we were, you know, the hypothetical business in a financial crisis, and our one shining idea was we're going to get out of this by raising prices. We're not going to look at expense lines. We're not going to look at how we run our business. We're not going to look at efficiency. How many businesses using that framework would succeed? I can probably count them on this hand and have things left to point fingers with. You know, it would just be enlightening for the charge of this committee to maybe be more focused on financial excellence. And what I mean by that is perhaps we look at short-term revenue options that help bridge this gap. But on a longer term basis, we're looking at how do we run this ship better? How do we run this business better? Because at the end of the day, city government is not. It's a business. It's a government entity that has revenue, expenses, and hopefully the top line's bigger than the bottom line. Finding a way to do that sustainably, I think, would be part of a long-term workable solution. Getting back to what, if anything, has gained traction. I'm with Bill. I've been at most of the meetings, and I think we wrote off the bike tax. I think the sugar tax got tabled. But it's, we're halfway into our meeting agenda, and Russ's idea is the one that is the leader so far, but to take 3 meetings, 1 serious deliberation that's not very efficient.
So 2 items that I think have traction. And one is payment in lieu of taxes, which I think all of you are familiar with. The state doesn't pay taxes, property taxes. And so there was House Bill 4072 introduced in the short session, this last short session, to have Salem be a test case for this. And the bill didn't go anywhere. I think it may have gotten a hearing in committee, but it died. And so I proposed that in addition to everything else that we're doing, that we give back to the city council a short list on legislative action that they could potentially pursue. And I think payment in lieu of services is one of them. And then the other one that is really interesting and has been on the books, it's ORS 190.110. And that is where the state will go into, MOU with a local municipality who provides services back to the state. And so the city could easily do that for fire and police. And it's something they have not pursued. Here again, it's been on the books for a long, long time. And it should actually, somebody should be looking at that right now, because what they were looking for in payment of lieu of services was for fire and police. And so those were 2 on the legislative list. And then there was one other that I thought was worth putting forward. And I think we got more or less consensus that yes, we need to do that, but it's an aside because it won't produce anything right now. And here again, it's not in sync with what it was that they gave us to look at.
I think there's one other thing that there was besides what Russ had talked about conversation-wise in the last meeting, the other one was talked about was the business licensing.
Yeah.
That was the second thing that was talked about. That would be where every single business, they figure there's 5,000 businesses in Salem that would do this based off payroll, these 5,000 businesses at payroll. One thing that kind of shocked me is when they also agreed that it would also be for nonprofits as well. That kind of surprised me. But I think another thing is some of the task force members, when you hear them talk, it's not saying, well, yeah, this is going to raise a lot of money, which I don't think it would. It's more like, well, the city needs this information. The city needs information. How many employees are there? How many employees are in the building? So when the fire department comes, they know how many people are there. And that's outside our scope. That's not what we should be thinking about. We don't, as a task force for revenue, we should care less about that part of it. So that kind of concerns me that it's getting that conversation, because I think the last task force, I think that was actually one of the items that was one of the final items. And I think that's going to be pushed a little bit harder going forward. I've talked to a couple of city council members and they're watching that real closely as well, because they think that's something that's going to try to be pushed more and more towards that direction. And I just want to let you guys know that the business community there is, 3 minutes of public comment at each meeting. I think people should start commenting and make public comment that this is not something that the business community really wants. And the reasons why. It obviously worked for the people that wanted the library. The budget committee.
TJ?
Yeah. So in all my time on council, one of the things we were always trying to accomplish was annexing the parts of our urban growth boundary that are already developed. There's huge areas that are already developed that, and
Right.
when we looked into that, it was always a net positive to the city by annexing those areas. And when they did it for the purposes of this, they're like, it's not viable, it's a net negative. And there's no way that that can be the case, that annexing those areas. Now, it's a little bit harder because they would have to vote to join the city. It's a benefit to them. They're utilizing our police and fire right now. They're utilizing our streets and our parks, and they pay nothing into the city as a result of that. Because they're outside the city limits. So it surprised me that they said that it was a negative, a net negative to annex the already developed
know.
areas.
I agree completely.
Russ?
Well, I guess I'll comment mainly on the income tax idea. I
By
think-
the way, if you could, I had asked if you could tell the crowd what you actually proposed. I
exactly.
don't think we've still heard what exactly you proposed beyond income tax. Did you propose a percentage? Could you get a little deeper into your proposal?
The proposal that, and we debated as to how to structure it in terms of the initial impact on the revenue committee. We all know that committees love to edit things and come up with something a little different than was proposed. So, oh, there I go. But we therefore, thanks, Tom, sorry, did not want to even think through what the reasonable, logical conclusion of this that would be politically acceptable first to the task force. And then, goes to the council, who knows what happens. So the specifics, I'll get into the numbers just for a moment with you. We made a proposal that would virtually raise all the money in the general fund. Okay, that's crazy. $113 million, I think it raised. The rates were graduated. Quite honestly, I'll be very honest with you here. I don't think an income tax is a viable option or is worth the problems that would be implementing if it isn't progressive, if it doesn't have different rates as the higher you earn, see, because the whole problem with our city budget is we can't raise the money with the ability to pay taxes that fees. He who pays the tax ought to receive the benefit. You can't do that with everything at all with the budget. So with a benefits received tax, that's a fee. Ability to pay tax says you tax where the money is, because that's the only ability that people have to pay the tax. Here's what I was actually saying is that these rates are silly. The idea of a income tax needs to be considered. I invite you, the committee, and anyone else to come back to us and help us structure appropriate and reasonable rates. Now we've done all that, we've got all kinds of scenarios, and the scenarios that I would favor and that I believe we will inject into the process, again, if the staff allows us to do that, right? Start with like 1/4% on incomes over $70,000. Anyone under, for now, anyone under 70,000 wouldn't pay anything under it. That avoids the problem that bedeviled the payroll tax. You're taking groceries off the table of the common people. I said in the committee, I believe I could show you that an income tax, you may remember this, the income tax would solve virtually every problem that doomed the payroll tax. And payroll tax was a miserably structured tax. I voted against it. I think the city needs the revenue. I buy their, oh my gosh, we're in crisis, we're gonna have to cut back. I buy those arguments. But I voted against the payroll tax, and I told Chris, in advance I was gonna do that because it's so miserably structured. It was my sensibilities as an economist that caused me to do that. I said in the committee, this needs to be tweaked, and some of you may be taking the rates a little too seriously. Okay, we're not going to cost you 40,000, DJ. It needs to be tweaked, and I would volunteer to be the head tweaker, but ultimately I want to be a co-tweaker. I want cooperation with anybody to say, hey, here's a set of rates that kind of does what we want it to do. And I believe ideally now, we should raise about 15 to 20 million with an income tax. That would do the deficit. That would allow a moderate tax reform, do away with the operations fee or something like that. It would simplify the tax structure of the city. It would generate enough interest in it to make it politically interesting to the community. And again, 67.7% of the tax returns in Salem, 2021 data, actual data from the state of Oregon, were below $70,000. So you'd have like 2/3 of the voting public would not pay any taxes under it. Oh, it might pass, something like that. Now, if we do not tax the well-to-do a little more heavily than we do that now, we cannot achieve tax reform. I can prove that to you as an economist with all kinds of arguments. So anyway, I would volunteer to massage rates and see what comes out with anybody that wants to play with me. All right?
Certainly, point of clarification.
So you mentioned 10 to 15 million would plug the hole for this deficit.
15 did.
Or 15 to 20 million. However, I think you guys stated that you don't have any guidance from the city on what number you're trying to achieve.
Correct.
So how do we get that number?
Okay. Raquel asked for more information during the meeting. We'll talk.
Well, I don't know that they've said we've got this four levels and if you do A, then we need this much. But they haven't told us what they want done, right? They just said, you come up with the revenue. And every time somebody asks that question, they go back to, well, do you want to just cover the gap? Right, the gap so that we remain steady with what we have, or do you want to add on this and then we'll need A plus B. Then if you want to go to the next level or to the final level, which I think was the 55 million, is that right?
50-something million.
Yes, yeah. Which then is a whole continuum of services.
Goals elusive,
Yes,
but the committee knows what the gap is. What it sounds like.
It's been a
The
moving
gap
target.
is elusive as well.
Brandon, by and large, at the budget committee and at council floor, the 15 million has now been identified as the gap. The 27 million, which was on the high end of the payroll tax discussion, did self-admit that it was up funding.
yes.
Programming and the like. So 15 million is kind of everybody's put their arms around as the stopgap.
Million, does it cover those programs that were set up out of the one time?
Yes. Well, it does include the navigation center and the homeless efforts.
So we have to set up an ongoing expense based on one. They can't pinpoint exactly what the dollar amount is. And we're being asked as citizens to fund this nonsense. Because, you know, Raquel, you made a comment about the survey and I got called on that survey. And one of the things that I keep hearing as a realtor, which just makes me bristle, is that we have a homeless problem because housing is so unaffordable. And, credit card debt has gone up 16% since pre-pandemic levels. The default rate has gone up 50% on credit card debt because families in this community and across the nation are living on credit cards because of our economy. And I just find it amazing that, you know, we talk about white privilege in this area. I think we got a problem with public personnel privilege. That they don't have to consider the very same budget things that every single family in this community is considering, which is where do I cut? I left the state for real estate because every 2 years when I was a state employee, I was facing being cut. And I am just highly offended that the only thing we're considering is a new revenue source. And unless this tax that you propose is replaced by removing a tax, which unfortunately, if you're a homeowner here, you're paying the bill for a whole lot of things, but I don't even trust them for that. That eventually it comes back. It always comes back. And this is just such an offensive conversation when I know what's going on with families out there. They don't have money for food. And we are so irresponsible and allow them to be this irresponsible.
The percentage of home ownership in Salem has dropped 4 to 6% in the last 15, 20 years. And that's because I've done housing studies and the way to analyze them is the ratio between average income in your community and average housing price. And it's an affordability index. Obviously, there's a whole lot goes on there that's sensitive to interest rates, you know, because with the interest rates we've got now compared to 5 years ago, whew,
Yes.
the home ownership is disappearing.
67% years ago because we had
was-
lending practices.
It was 62 to 64 a few years ago.
Raquel's name was mentioned, so I of course want to give her a chance to have a response.
I would agree, Amy. And, you know, I served on the budget committee for 6 years. I think it was 13 through 18, something like that. And I was on the revenue task force in 2018.
Mhm.
And, you know, here again, there was, you know, no discussion about what should be cut. And when you're not willing to have that conversation openly and you're just insistent that you must continue to do things, that then just pushes back on, quote, the goodwill of the people, you know. And to your point on the navigation center, so this past session, the short session, allocated millions of dollars to local communities for navigation center. So here again, are they being good stewards of what's coming in? Are they looking ahead saying, oh, well, we know this has been earmarked. Yes, I have to apply for it, you know, but that's the way the state money comes to the locals, right? Is you apply for that grant and demonstrate the work that you're doing. But they don't even factor that in, which is disheartening. So
I want to switch gears just a tad. There were 2 items brought up in the mayoral debate 2 evenings ago at Elsinore Theater. And I, just from a simple observation, I noticed that nobody on the task force has touched about either of them. And each mayoral candidate brought up a different idea. The first was brought up by mayoral candidate Julie Hoy of a library district. The second was brought up by Mayor Hoy of a public safety bond. I'd like to see comments on those 2 proposals and if they have been discussed at the Alternative Revenue Task Force thus far. And let's start instead in the middle this time. Comment on either the library district or a public safety bond.
One general part of it, there was 5 items we did a deep dive, and one was a public levy. And I think maybe a public levy or for public safety was discussed, and that might hit on some of that. But I don't really know that much about. We haven't really talked about anything else besides that.
Okay, TJ?
I think a library district, there's a lot of people that have shown up at town hall saying they want to pay more to support the library. I think that's great. I think a library district is an option we ought to at least consider and put it out to see if the voters want to support it. As far as the public safety bonding, well, that just builds structures. So I think what Mayor Hoy probably meant was a levy, which again, I'm in favor of. Put it out for a public safety levy and see if the voters want to support those services.
Actually, and I need to correct myself. You're correct. He did say a levy, not a bond. I want to correct
Yeah,
myself on
yeah.
record.
Sure.
Thank you for that clarity. But TJ, no discussion at Alternative Revenue Task Force on those two items thus far.
Nope, not yet.
Okay, so I'm seeing Scott saying the same. Bill, no discussions on these items.
Nope.
Okay,
I'll make one point. There is a local community member who has spoken to us each time, I believe, and he did give context to the library that there used to be a special district for the library 25 years ago. And I did inquire as to what happened to it. And he said, well, the city had enough revenue that they just did away with the district. So at one point, the city did have that specifically for.
Well, Tom, isn't the library district, isn't the state librarian suggested during a city council meeting and the mayor scoffed at that? And it asked that, I think the state librarian, if that's a position, I might be making this up, but asked her to petition to the state to make payment in lieu of taxes before he would address the library. And I think Julie brought that up later, asking why did you brush her off so briskly when the city obviously is passionate about the library? I think Julie had a good point in asking that question, but I think that's what the state librarian had come up with.
Interesting.
That was mentioned at the forum luncheon debate we had.
yeah, I don't want to ever speak for, of course, a sitting mayor or a mayoral candidate. But Chris did clarify on, Mayor Hoy did clarify on Tuesday night that he felt he had enough information to understand what a library district was, and that's why he may have been a little bit short on asking for information. Scott?
I think from a democratic perspective, that's one thing I'm gonna try and push the task force to do is take a look at. There's saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Identifying priorities of the people, whether it's library, we received some polling that indicated library, police, fire, all polled very highly in terms of importance to the public. And so do we attack this $15 to $20 million gap through special districts, levies, put those out to the people and let them say yes or no? And, I don't want to say live with the result. Give them the option to put their money where their mouth is.
Now is the time in our program, we're gonna switch it over to audience and our online participants. If you're online and you have a question, we'd ask that you type that question into the chat box. And our skilled staff member, Dan Johnson, will assist me in feeding those upwards. But let's start with those in the room. President-elect Mike Aaron.
A lot of questions, but I'll start with, so that you were provided my lots out on the list of, I think you said 44 sort of proposals. I'm curious if any of the proposals touched on the way the city forecasts both revenues and expenses, because we've seen, through outside work, outside studies, 10-year history of these huge gaps between what's forecasted and what's actual. And in discussions with Josh Eggleston, he said, well, we absolutely cannot let the city, go into red, understand that. But it's a horrible business practice, horrible financial practice to allow those huge gaps to continue if there's an ability to pull that together. It certainly seems like found revenue if you could tighten up forecasts. So I'm curious if there's been any discussion whatsoever about adjusting how the city's forecasting both of their expenses and their revenue.
I'm not aware of any.
Well, we had a very short discussion speaking to forecasts, we were looking at year-over-year growth in expenses, particularly wages. And if I recall, there were single-digit increases in years 1 and 2 of the forecast, and then I want to say a high teen moving later into the forecast. And we asked for some clarification from Josh as to what was the driver behind those forecasts. And if I recall, the answer was less than convincing. So to me, what that means to me is it makes me question the quality of the forecasting. And are we creating optically a larger problem based on poor forecasting? I think that's a very real management issue.
Others who wish to address President-elect Hagan's question? Dick?
Russ, you and I are the graybeards here, and I don't have a beard. You remember though, history of taxing wealthy. Best example was here in the Northwest with luxury taxes in the 80s. There was a big operation in Vancouver, Washington, building yachts, very expensive yachts, 186 employees. Luxury tax came in, people started buying their wealthy yachts from Spain, other countries, and they went bankrupt in months. So you want to be careful of that. I think we forget too a history of John Kennedy president and Reagan president lowering the taxes by 33%, 37%, and taxes went down in a V, and receipts to the treasury went further. 20 times in the history. You're the economist, I'm not, but I remember that where more cash was generated by lower tax. And then also history too. I remember when Swain was the mayor, when they came up with the sidewalk tax. That was when the business community finally woke up and got involved in the certain business. It was only like houses for a whole lot of and then my last thing is the item classic though of the amphitheater, the information on the amphitheater on the front page of the Statesman Journal, 50 grand. Remember that $4 million was raised from private funds to the amphitheater. The amphitheater was said at $750,000. It was told that it was going to be run by a quasi-public private and the city then took over the operation of it, and it was going to spend it in absolute percent. And so those things need to be analyzed, and you know there's other issues that aren't entrepreneurial. There's echo effect to this. Remember, if you start doing bond issues and stuff, we're gonna affect Chemecca. Chemecca is going to come out in next year on their bond issue. It's going to be very, very important, and there's a huge ROI Chemecca. So you know that's I you know, and then we're talking about $70,000. We're on a real precipice on getting people angst about Oregon and then about Salem. And the best example, and it's not the outlet was supposed to be wealthy and all that stuff, but we had 13 houses. Now we have 6, and one's an outlier. And that because when you live here in the community, you want the schools to be better, you want this to be better, and local small businesses want these to be outside of it. But now when you have absentee owners, as you do in Portland, in 1980, we had 11 Wall Street companies. Now there's only 2 Wall Street companies in the state, Lydia and Bill Nye. 90. So and in my age group, a lot of are moving out of the state. And moving out of that, state we want to get concerned about, of course. I'm worried about Salem in the metro area. So what is done, and then my last thing off the deal is the consultants. 3 consultants were fired on Union Gospel Mission, YMCA, and the Boys and Girls Club, and $122 million raised in 36 months. By private people. Some of the money was from the state, which I always think, or that's my money. But the whole thing is that's a slippery slope on people from the outside telling us how we want to be.
Brandon.
Yeah, to follow up on Dick's comments, Russ probably knows this better than anyone, but Detroit, Michigan went through a period of time when obviously they were booming and they decided to raise extra. Business owners, and then they had a mass exodus. So they did succeed. They voted in this increase in tax, but the net effect was less revenue than what they began with. Since then, private money's come back in and said, let's build back up Detroit and bring in other businesses. And the city's realized, okay, maybe we made a mistake. Bringing in new businesses has increased tax revenue quite a bit. Knowing that, seeing that it's happened other places throughout our country, and what you guys are trying to accomplish, when we pass it, revenue, right? So not, I agree with everything stated, but your guys aren't supposed to look expensive. Is there any talk about encouraging, finding incentives to bring businesses and bring more jobs to this community and not just continuing to tax those that exist? Because if that is the case, you will find, whether it's a viable option or not, you will find businesses that decide to shift. So in the forecasting, that revenue number is not gonna be static. So is there any discussion within the group about, hey, how can we attract other businesses to our community?
Raquel and I and Becky Beaman, during the break of the last meeting, had a sidebar conversation, and I brought that point up. Instead of just taxing all of us that currently live here and the businesses, why don't we entice businesses come here who will, either bring employees and executives with them or hire within the community, and that generates tax base. But it was a sidebar conversation, and Becky and I and Raquel were gonna try to get it brought up during that meeting. But Russ kind of blew us out of the water with his proposal, and that took the bulk of the meeting. But it was a sidebar conversation, and I think, Becky and Raquel both in agreement that maybe that's something we should discuss too. The problem with that, BJ, is that we're looking for something that can fix a problem now. And that won't, but I think we need to present a couple different options, right? Here's part of the pie right now. Here's 3 years, this piece, and then 10 years from now, we'll have this piece. I think that would be wise of us to present to city council, but I can tell you this, it's not gonna be done by June. So we need to get buy-off from Moss Adams, the city, and I believe that the rest of the task force is willing. I don't want to speak for everyone. Hey, let's take this a few months longer and get us there. Get something that's a final product that we're all proud to submit.
So,
Very good point.
How do you answer that?
I mean, I'm confused what I heard Russ say about what your charge was, and then what Raquel said. I don't know what your charge is, and if your charge is the only thing that's on the table is revenue. Sounds to me like I don't know that we're solving a problem for the community.
I can clarify that. It is very clear in the charter of what the alternative revenue task force is not to look at expenses. That is going to be done by the budget committee. It's very clear that this group is gathered for the purposes of identifying revenue into the system.
And then take it or leave it. Council.
But I mean, we just need to be real clear. This is very clearly defined that group is gathered to define new revenue. Mike,
Based on what we've heard shared, it seems like the task force structure is set up to, I guess, worst case scenario, turn you guys into scapegoats for making tough decisions. Best case scenario, you're just providing a cover for the council to make the tough decision and say, well, this is the task force presented. How are the findings of the task force presented to the council in final form, or is it presented to the budget committee, or who is it presented to? How is it presented? Who does the presenting? What happens if you come back and say no there?
I don't think we know the answer to your question. I don't think we know what that process is after we have an idea.
Can you ask those questions?
Yep. Yep.
I think conceptually how it's supposed to look is we will have these meetings with learning, education, indoctrination, deliberation, and then come back with a recommendation to be presented to the city council in July. To Bill's earlier point, I think we're going to push to try and move that window out to give us time to more thoroughly and thoughtfully come up with considerations. But ultimately, my understanding is that the task force will vote on a recommendation to council, who can then rubber stamp it, throw it in the trash.
What I would love to see is my take that there's probably not action. But I would love to see members of the task force put on public record what you shared with us today about how you're treated and how you said.
We make a motion to fire.
So that the public
Yeah.
knows or how the process tells a little bit fuller story about how we end up where we're at.
Agreed.
The last question will, wrap our work up here. First of all, I think the community had a little bit of an eye opener with the resounding vote on the payroll tax. Has there been discussions at task force level that anything that were to be brought forward would be brought to a vote of the people? Or is it that this would not be brought for a vote of the people, or have you even been asked? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
Well, if I might, Tom, when in 18, when I sat on the committee and I went on record saying, I agree with these recommendations. However, they all need to go before the voters. You know, this should not be a blanket decision by the council to impose something new without, you know, the community voting on it. And I would do the same. Any recommendation, if we come to consensus on anything, I think I would want part of that recommendation be that it has to go to the voters. It's you know, if we're looking at new revenue, that's taxes, and taxes should be self-imposed by those who pay it, not you know, directed, lorded over that, you know, you owe the king.
I saw Scott's head nodding, so I find you in agreement. Is that safe, Scott?
Oh, I guess maybe this is just a matter of principle. It has to go to the voters.
Yeah.
Ask.
I don't think from a charter perspective or from a scope perspective, I don't think it's within our scope to impose a tax on the city.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, are you feeling it needs to go, whatever comes out needs to go to vote of the?
Yes.
David, how are you feeling about that?
No, I totally agree.
Okay, TJ,
Yeah.
Russ?
There's only two possibilities, I think, of the nature of our final report. A whole bunch of little things that we speak in detail on a lot of things. We kick the can down the road. Don't mention public vote or not, and it would be unclear. And I think the reception for whatever we said would be very, very mixed. Any big issue that we propose, though, I can't see us doing anything but strongly recommending a vote to the people coming out of this task force. And that would lock the council into that for sure. I don't think they're going to risk not going to the people again. That's my sense. But there's no mention of this in our official charge. Kind of up to us.
Like President-elect Herron mentioned, we'd like you to ask that if you could. With that,
Tom,
thanks, Bill.
I have one point just real quick I want to make. I know we're always fighting the time here, but there's a lot of open seats in this room. A few months ago, I stood in this room because it was standing room only when there was a meeting held on how you could bid on city projects. Because everybody in this room or everybody that came to that wants to generate revenue for their business, right? There shouldn't be any open seats in here. There should be standing room only. And we need to talk to our friends in the business community and let them know this is another way to generate revenue for your business, not having to pay taxes to a city that really doesn't need money, in my opinion. They need to learn how to budget.
Ah, damn it.
This should be standing room only, and the fact that it's not is troubling. But when you have a meeting to learn how to bid better for a city job, standing room only. Something to keep in mind.
I love plugs like that. Watching at home, we meet the first Thursday, 7 a.m. to 8:30. Start your day out right. We always have fresh coffee. With that, one thing I think is so important to remember as somebody who has to do a lot of meetings and fortunate that is my role in the community. These people are 100% volunteers and giving of their time. And regardless of where they align in their opinions, what an incredible treasure for them to give their time. Would you help me in recognizing that? We would like to end on a very important note. Before we meet next time, we will have a city election. The Salem Chamber has endorsed 3 candidates in that race. Individuals we have endorsed are Julie Boyd for mayor, Shane Matthews in Ward 3, and we've endorsed Vanessa Nordyke in Ward 7. With that, the most important thing you can do is respect how hard Americans work domestically and overseas for your right to vote. We need you to participate. We urge you to ask your neighbor to vote. Voice needs to be heard. And generally, we have been voting as a city in the 20 to 25% range on key elections.
Yeah.
We need to be better. Please vote. It's coming
Government by the
May.
minority.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.